These are the 8 richest families that quietly own Hawaii, and what they control is absolutely wild. We'll meet a sailor who jumped ship and married into the royal family, a family that has owned an entire Hawaiian island since 1864, when they bought it from a king for $10,000 in gold. And at number 1, a man who bought 98% of another island, including its water supply and its newspaper. Let's get into the full list. Number 8. The Parker Dynasty. Let's kick this off in 1809 with a 19-year-old sailor from Massachusetts who jumped ship in Hawaii and accidentally founded a cattle empire that's still running 2 centuries later. Here's how it happened, and the setup is genuinely bizarre. Back in the 1790s, a British captain named George Vancouver gifted a handful of cattle to King Kamehameha the Great. The king declared them kapu, meaning off-limits, so they could breed in peace. And breed they did. Within 20 years, those few animals had multiplied into thousands of wild, aggressive cattle rampaging across the slopes of Mauna Kea, wrecking homes and injuring people. The gift had turned into an infestation. Enter John Palmer Parker, the sailor from Newton, Massachusetts, who had already caught the king's favor. He went off to sea again during the War of 1812 and came back carrying an advanced musket, which earned him exclusive rights to hunt the wild cattle. And that's the whole origin. A man with the best gun on the island hired to solve a cow problem. But he didn't just hunt them. He worked out how to domesticate them, fence them, and turn them into a salt beef industry that became a cornerstone of the island economy. And in 1816, he made the move that turned a job into a dynasty, marrying Chiefess Kipikane, the granddaughter of Kamehameha the Great himself. A New England sailor married directly into the Hawaiian royal line. Parker Ranch was formally founded in January of 1847, which makes it older than most of the famous cattle operations in Texas by more than 30 years. At its peak, the ranch sprawled across a slice of the Big Island so enormous it accounted for roughly 9% of the entire island. And today, it still runs over 130,000 acres and stands as the 6th largest calf producer in the United States. And the family kept turning up at the center of Hawaiian history. Parker's grandson, Samuel, became Minister of Foreign Affairs for Queen Liliuokalani, and on the day she was deposed in 1893, he helped negotiate the surrender to avoid bloodshed. During the Second World War, the ranch leased land to the military for Camp Tarawa, and almost overnight 50,000 Marines were training in Waimea for the invasion of Japan. The last heir was Richard Smart, 6th generation, born in 1913, and he was not remotely what you'd expect. The man was a professional actor and singer who performed on Broadway and around the world before finally coming home to the ranch in 1960. When he died in 1992, he left the bulk of the estate in a charitable trust for the Waimea community, so the ranch still runs, still grazing Black Angus on the slopes where those first wild cattle once caused chaos. The Parkers spent 2 centuries turning a cattle infestation into a fortune. Software, it turns out, takes considerably less time than that. Number 7. The Benioff Dynasty. Mark Benioff is worth somewhere in the region of $10 billion, and he made every cent of it by inventing a way to sell software you never actually own. He founded Salesforce out of a San Francisco apartment in 1999 with the then radical idea that businesses shouldn't buy software in a box at all. They should rent it over the internet. That model became what we now just call cloud computing, and Salesforce grew into one of the most valuable enterprise companies on the planet. He also bought Time magazine in 2018 for $190 million, essentially with pocket change. But his relationship with Hawaii is different from most billionaires who show up with a checkbook, and it's worth understanding why. Benioff has holdings of more than 600 acres, mostly around Waimea on the Big Island, which is modest compared to some of the names coming up. What isn't modest is what he's poured into the place. He's given tens of millions to Hawaii causes, and notably to the local hospital system. And he's been publicly vocal about the responsibilities that come with owning land there, rather than treating it as a private playground. He's also been unusually blunt about the tension, because after the Maui wildfires in 2023, he was one of the loudest voices warning outside investors against swooping in to buy up burned land from grieving families. That's not a normal thing for a billionaire landowner to say out loud, given it argues directly against his own class's interests. So he sits on this list as the acceptable face of the phenomenon, a man who bought in and then spent a great deal of energy insisting that buying in comes with obligations. Whether that's enough is a live argument in Hawaii right now, and we'll get to why in a moment. Benioff bought in, then spent a lot of energy arguing about what buying in should oblige you to do. Over on Maui, somebody has quietly been buying the side of a volcano. Speaking of the kind of thinking that turns a fortune into an obligation, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research, the deep focus brain state linked to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39. It comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to that volcano and the woman who has been buying it piece by piece. Number 6. The Winfrey Dynasty. Oprah Winfrey owns more than 2,100 acres of Maui, and the way she assembled it tells you everything about how serious she is. This wasn't one purchase. She's been quietly stacking parcels on the slopes of Haleakala for years, buying 1,000 acres from Haleakala Ranch, picking up over 200 more in Hana, and then in a recent deal adding roughly 870 acres in Kula for about $6.5 million. The result is a mostly continuous stretch of green hillside running up into a forest preserve on the flank of a dormant volcano. And what's on it is the interesting part, because it's mostly nothing. Cattle graze across most of it. Large sections are undeveloped, and she's been working to keep them that way, treating the land as something to conserve rather than something to build on. In a state where the default billionaire move is to put a compound on the best view available, choosing to leave 2,000 acres largely empty is its own kind of statement. Now, she's had to defend it. After the 2023 wildfires devastated Lahaina, Oprah faced real criticism online about wealthy landowners on Maui, and she responded by pointing to donations and by going out to the shelters herself. The debate about whether that's sufficient hasn't gone away, and honestly it shouldn't, because it's the same debate hanging over every single name in this video. But here's the thing that makes her different from the two men coming up next. Oprah didn't buy a fortress. She bought a hillside, put cows on it, and left it alone. Oprah bought 2,000 acres and deliberately left most of them empty. You can also spend a fortune on just 14 if what you're really buying is the water in front of them. Number 5. The Bezos Dynasty. Jeff Bezos is one of the richest human beings who has ever lived, and when he decided he wanted a piece of Hawaii, he did not buy the biggest thing available. He bought the most private thing available. In 2021, he paid a reported $78 million for a 14-acre estate on Maui at La Perouse Bay. Now, 14 acres is nothing compared to Oprah's 2,000, and the main house is a fairly reasonable 4,500 square feet. On paper, it sounds almost restrained. Then you look at where it actually sits. The estate is on the far southern tip of Maui, past the end of the road, surrounded by dormant lava fields, which means there is essentially nothing around it and no easy way to get to it. And it comes with its own bay, which is so secluded that no commercial activity of any kind is permitted there. No tour boats, no operators, nobody selling anything. That's the whole purchase. He didn't buy acreage, he bought silence. And in Hawaii, silence is far more expensive than land. Anyone with money can buy a big lot. Almost nobody can buy a coastline nobody else is allowed to work on. Bezos built Amazon into a company that put a warehouse within a day's drive of nearly every American, and then spent $78 million on a corner of Maui, where the defining feature is that it's very difficult for anybody to reach him. Picture standing on that bay, black lava on every side, and not a single boat allowed on the water. Bezos paid $78 million to make sure nobody could reach him. Up on Kauai, a far bigger purchase ended up in court, and the fight was over something buried inside the property itself. Number 4. The Zuckerberg Dynasty. Mark Zuckerberg started buying on the north shore of Kauai in 2014. What he's built since has become the single most argued about private property in the state. It's called Koala Ranch, and the scale is genuinely hard to picture. The holdings run well past 1,000 acres, and reporting has put the total investment in the region of hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a compound with multiple buildings, extensive agricultural operations, and, in the detail everybody fixates on, a wall running along a section of the boundary road that neighbors complained blocked their breeze and their view. But the real controversy was legal, and you need to understand a piece of Hawaiian land law to see why it stung so badly. Scattered inside large properties across Hawaii, there are small parcels called kuleana lands, granted to native Hawaiian tenant farmers back in the 1850s. And after a century and a half of inheritance, a single tiny parcel can have dozens or even hundreds of living descendants with a legal claim to a fraction of it. In 2016, entities connected to Zuckerberg filed quiet title actions, a legal process that can force those scattered descendants to sell their interest at auction. The backlash in Hawaii was immediate and ferocious, because to a lot of people it looked like the wealthiest man on the island using the courts to buy out native Hawaiian families from land their ancestors had farmed. He dropped the lawsuits within weeks, publicly acknowledged he'd misunderstood how the process would be received, and said he wanted to work directly with the families instead. He's kept buying since, and he and Priscilla have committed serious money locally, including for conservation and for native species work on the island. But Koala Ranch remains the thing people point at when they argue about who Hawaii is actually for. Zuckerberg arrived on Kauai as an outsider with a checkbook. Not everybody who bought big in Hawaii came from somewhere else. Number 3. The Case Dynasty. Here's what separates Steve Case from everybody else in the back half of this list. He isn't a mainland billionaire who discovered Hawaii on holiday. He was born and raised there, and he went to Punahou School in Honolulu, the same high school as Barack Obama. Then he left, co-founded America Online, and wrote it to a fortune during the era when AOL was quite literally how most of America first got on the internet. At its peak, the company was so dominant that it merged with Time Warner in a deal that remains one of the most famous in corporate history, largely for how badly it eventually went. And then he came home and bought a serious chunk of the island he grew up on. Case is now the second largest billionaire landowner in Hawaii, holding around 57,400 acres. The centerpiece is Grove Farm on Kauai, which runs to over 35,000 acres on its own, and is not some recently invented estate. Grove Farm is 174 years old, one of the historic plantation companies that built the sugar economy of Kauai, back when sugar was the entire point of the Hawaiian Islands to outside investors. That industry is essentially gone now. Hawaiian sugar collapsed, and the last plantations closed, leaving tens of thousands of acres behind with no obvious purpose. What Case has been doing is leasing that land out for diversified and sustainable agriculture, trying to work out what an old sugar estate is supposed to be in a century that doesn't want sugar. So the boy from Punahou made a fortune connecting America to the internet, then came back and bought the plantation. There's something almost novelistic about that, and it puts him in a completely different category from the men buying beachfront they'd never seen before. Case owns 57,000 acres of the island he was raised on. 20 miles off that same coast, one family owns something no checkbook has ever been able to touch. Number 2. The Robinson Dynasty. There is an island in Hawaii you almost certainly cannot visit, cannot buy land on, and probably cannot even name. It's called Niihau. It sits about 18 miles off the coast of Kauai, and one family has owned all of it since 1864. The story of how starts with a widow, Elizabeth McHutchison. Sinclair had lost her husband and her eldest son at sea in 1846, and she was managing the family's affairs in Pigeon Bay, New Zealand, with her 5 children. Eventually, she sold up and went looking for somewhere else entirely. She was 63 years old when she arrived in Hawaii and bought the island of Niihau from King Kamehameha V for $10,000 in gold. But the king attached a condition to that sale, and this is the part that makes the whole thing extraordinary. He made the family promise to protect the island and the people living on it from outside influence. And 160 years later, her descendants are still keeping it. That promise is exactly why Niihau is known as the Forbidden Isle. There's no regular tourism, no commercial development, and access is tightly controlled by the family. Hawaiian remains the primary spoken language there, in a way it is essentially nowhere else on Earth, which is a direct consequence of a family deliberately keeping the modern world at arm's length for 6 generations. Today, the island is managed by brothers Bruce and Keith Robinson, and the family's total holdings run to around 101,000 acres, roughly 46,000 of that being Niihau itself, and over 55,000 more on neighboring Kauai, which makes them the largest private landowner on that island after the state. Now, it's a genuinely complicated legacy, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Critics argue that an arrangement where one family controls the land, the housing, and the access on an island of native Hawaiian residents is paternalistic no matter how well-intentioned the promise was. Supporters point out that Niihau is the one place where the language and the way of life survived largely intact, and that this is not a coincidence. Either way, no billionaire on this list owns anything like it. The Robinsons don't own the most valuable land in Hawaii. They own the only island where a king's condition is still being enforced by his buyer's great-great-grandchildren. The Robinsons got their island by making a promise to a king and then keeping it for 160 years. There is a faster way to get one, and it costs about $300 million. Number 1. The Ellison Dynasty. And here he is. Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle, one of the 2 or 3 wealthiest people alive with a fortune that has run into the hundreds of billions of dollars, and the largest private landowner in the state of Hawaii by an enormous margin. Because in 2012, Larry Ellison bought an island. Not a house on an island. Not an estate. He paid roughly $300 million to David Murdoch's Castle and Cook for about 98% of Lanai, Hawaii's 6th largest island. And the only reason it isn't 100% is that a scattering of small parcels belong to other people in the state. Now sit with what 98% of an island actually includes, because this is the part that stops people. It wasn't just land. The purchase came with 2 luxury resorts. It came with the island's water utility. It came with the local newspaper. It came with essentially all of the infrastructure serving roughly 3,000 residents, a great many of whom promptly became his employees. He didn't buy a property, he bought a functioning society and everything it runs on. The island itself is wonderfully strange. It has around 30 miles of paved road and 400 miles of unpaved road. It has no traffic lights. It was once home to the largest pineapple plantation on the planet, back when Dole ran the place, which is why people still call it the Pineapple Island, even though the pineapple operation shut down decades ago. Ellison set up a company called Pulama Lanai to manage it, and he has poured money in. There's Sensei Lanai, a 4 Seasons wellness retreat, plus restaurants, a sculpture collection, and an openly stated ambition to turn the entire island into a model for sustainability, powering it on renewable energy and growing food locally on a scale nobody else has tried. And residents have pushed back loudly on the thing you'd expect. There is still a serious shortage of affordable housing on an island where one man owns nearly all the housing, and when your landlord, your employer, your water supplier, and your newspaper are the same person, the word people keep reaching for is company town. That's the tension that runs under this entire video. Everyone else on this list bought a piece of Hawaii. Larry Ellison bought a whole island, the taps it drinks from, and the paper that reports on him. So there you have it. From a Massachusetts sailor who married a king's granddaughter and built a cattle empire on Mauna Kea, to a widow who bought an entire island for $10,000 in gold and made a promise her family is still keeping, to Larry Ellison owning the water supply of Lanai. These 8 families don't just live in Hawaii. They own its ranches, its shorelines, its plantations, and in 2 cases, entire islands. That's the underground secret of the Aloha state. Paradise has landlords, and now you know exactly who they are. So which one surprised you the most? Was it the family that's protected the Forbidden Isle for 160 years? The billionaire who bought 14 acres just to get a bay nobody else is allowed to sail on? Or the man who owns 98% of an island in the newspaper that covers him? Drop your pick in the comments, because we genuinely love hearing from you. And if you enjoyed this one, hit that like button, subscribe to Global Status, and we'll see you in the next one.